Snow clung to the pines like ghosts wrapped around branches. The wind moved slow and heavy over the ridges, whispering through the trees with a mournful voice, like it remembered something the land had long tried to forget. In the middle of that vast white silence stood a small cabin, weathered by years and solitude, its chimney coughing up a weak trail of smoke into the iron-colored sky. It was the only sign that someone still lived there. Thomas Briggs sat by the hearth with a steaming mug in his hands, not drinking, just holding it, watching the flames and thinking of nothing and everything all at once. His face was a map of time and silence, creases carved by sun and sorrow, a jawline strong but sagging under the weight of years. His eyes were sharp, the kind that had seen too much and learned to speak too little. He didn't shave anymore, except when the whiskers itched too much, and his clothes, flannel and worn denim, smelled faintly of wood smoke, horsehair, and loneliness. Outside, the snow was falling again, quiet and relentless. The world had gone white and still, save for the occasional creak of the windmill behind the barn, or the soft stomping of restless hooves in the stable. The horses sensed something. They always did, long before he could. He stood, slowly, bones cracking, joints resisting. He glanced at the framed photograph on the mantel, its edges browned and curling like dry leaves. A woman with kind eyes and a soft smile stood next to him in the photo. Her hands rested on the roundness of her belly, the shape of life not yet born. He stared at her a long while, as he did every morning. Then he turned away. There was no one left to speak to, and even if there had been, what would he say? "Hi, try, Marty." He pulled on his coat, heavy and patched at the elbows, then grabbed a lantern and headed to the barn. The path was crusted with ice beneath fresh snow, and his boots made a low crunch with every step. As he unlatched the barn door, the wind caught it and flung it open with a creak like a coffin lid. The horses inside snorted and stomped. "Easy," he muttered. Voice gravel over stone. Duke, his oldest gelding, paced in his stall, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. The younger mare, Willow, neighed once, stamping the ground as if something unseen moved around them. Thomas narrowed his eyes and stepped inside, swinging the lantern low. Nothing but hay, shadow, and steam from warm animal breath. Still, the unease was there, a pressure on the back of his neck. He'd lived too long in the wilderness to ignore it. The wind howled again, distant, sharp, almost human. He paused. That wasn't wind. He walked to the edge of the barn and leaned out, scanning the tree line. Darkness draped everything beyond the clearing, and the falling snow blurred the edges of the world. But there it was again, another sound. Not a wolf's howl exactly, not a coyote either, something longer, lonelier, a kind of mourning cry. He looked back at the barn, then toward his cabin, the firelight flickering faintly behind the window. He should go back inside, shut the door, pretend the wild wasn't calling. Instead, he went to the shed, pulled out his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and lit a brighter lantern. Something was moving out there. He didn't know why he had to find it, only that he did. At first light, the snow had deepened, and the trail was fresher. Prints in the powder that didn't belong to deer or cattle. Paw prints. Several of them, wide-set and deep. Wolves. A whole pack, maybe. He followed the trail past the edge of his land, through frost-bitten trees and winding brush that snagged his coat. The wind had eased, as if holding its breath. He pushed forward for an hour, maybe two. Time lost meaning in the hush of snow and forest. Then, as he rounded a bend near the old ravine, he saw them. At the edge of a low hollow, 6 wolves stood in a ring, their backs bristling, but not at him. They faced inward, encircling something. He stopped. One of them turned its head, locking eyes with him, amber and intelligent. Not the look of a beast defending prey. There was no growl, no charge. Just stillness. He raised the lantern higher, squinting past the glare. In the center of the ring, half buried in snow, was a form. Small, Fragile, human, a girl. She lay curled tightly, her body swaddled in thick, filthy hides. Her hair, long and matted, spilled over her face like black thread tangled in wind. One arm poked out, thin as a stick, fingers frozen in a clawed grasp. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Her breath steamed faintly in the cold. Thomas took one cautious step forward. The wolves didn't move. He lowered his rifle, then slowly unslung it, letting it drop into the snow beside him. Still, they watched. He went to one knee, lantern held low, snow soaking through his trousers. The girl's skin was pale beneath the grime, and her lips were blue. She had gashes on her legs. Her feet were bare beneath the hides, and around her wrist, an iron shackle, broken and rusted. He swallowed. "Hey there," he said softly, unsure why his voice cracked. "You're all right now." No reply. She didn't stir. He looked up at the wolves again. "I'm taking her," he said, more to the trees than to them. "Ain't here to harm her." Still, they did not move. Slowly, he set down the lantern, and with both arms, he lifted her. She was lighter than a sack of grain, bones under skin, heatless and shivering. As he rose, one of the wolves let out a low sound, something between a growl and a groan. Not hostile, more like farewell. Then, as silently as they had come, the wolves turned and vanished into the woods. Thomas stood frozen, heart pounding. Not out of fear, but something else. He looked down at the girl in his arms, her face pressed against his coat. Snowflakes kissed her cheek and melted on her brow. He tightened his grip and turned back toward home. The trail back felt longer, harder. The snow seemed deeper, but he did not stop. He held her as if the weight might remind him he still had strength left. The horses neighed when he returned, the fire in the hearth nearly out. He laid her gently on his cot, covered her with blankets, and stoked the flames. When the fire roared back to life, he sat beside her and stared, not just at her, but at the thing that had crept back into his chest. A flicker, a whisper, a forgotten sense of duty. And for the first time in years, Thomas Briggs prayed, not with words, but with silence, because somehow he knew the wolves had let him live. And so had she. The fire hissed low in the hearth, licking at the dry logs Thomas had stacked with shaking hands. He sat beside the cot, knees drawn up, fingers pressed against his forehead, staring at the girl wrapped in every blanket he owned. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only sound that mattered. Outside, the wind was picking up again, rattling the shutters and throwing powdered snow against the walls like a warning. But he didn't move. He just listened to her breathe, shallow and slow, like a bird caught under ice. Her skin had warmed some, but not enough. Her lips were still cracked and pale, the edge of frostbite showing on her toes. He'd cleaned her wounds as best he could, boiled water with herbs he vaguely remembered from his wife's notes long ago, dabbed at the marks on her legs and back. The worst were the burns. Old, some healed poorly, some fresh. One angry welt circled her ankle like a snake bite. Another marred her left shoulder, the skin puckered where the heat had eaten deep. She hadn't made a sound the whole time. No whimper, no cry, not even when the needle passed through torn skin as he stitched a gash along her hip. She lay there like something between life and death, and yet she breathed. That was enough. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the rocking chair beside her, feeding the fire, watching for signs of fever. He didn't pray, not the way men spoke in churches, but he thought of things, of the wolves, of her eyes, of the silence that settled between them and the weight of it. He thought about the photo above the fireplace, and how his wife once said some silences weren't empty. They were just full of things no one knew how to say. The next morning she stirred. It was barely a twitch, a shift of her hand beneath the covers. But it jolted him upright. He leaned forward, careful not to scare her. Her eyelids fluttered, opened halfway, revealing dark eyes, black as coal, glinting like obsidian in the firelight. She blinked, stared straight at him, then looked past him to the ceiling, as if unsure whether she was awake or dreaming. Her lips parted. She tried to move, but winced and gasped. "Don't," he said gently, lifting a hand. "You're safe. Just rest." She blinked at him again, her brow furrowed. "You're at my cabin? I found you. You were out cold in the woods." Her mouth moved. No sound. He reached for the mug beside the cot and brought it close. "Just water. Sip, if you can." She didn't take it. Her eyes flicked between his hand and his face. Then she shook her head, barely, and turned away. He exhaled slowly, setting the mug down. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said after a long pause. "Name's Thomas." She closed her eyes again. "Thomas Briggs," he added, more to fill the air than to convince her. He stood, stretched his back, and rubbed his jaw. He hadn't shaved in days, and his face itched with the stubble. He left her there, stepping out into the cold morning to tend the horses, his boots crunching against the frozen earth. The sun hung low behind clouds, offering no warmth, only a weak light. The horses were restless again. Duke stared at the woods beyond the pasture and snorted uneasily. "You sense 'em still out there, don't you?" Thomas muttered, running a hand along the gelding's neck. He didn't blame them. He could feel it too. The woods weren't empty. He could feel the weight of eyes, the way the cold carried whispers. When he returned to the cabin, the girl hadn't moved, but her eyes were open again. For the next few days they lived in silence. Thomas fed the fire, fed the girl broth, and boiled root vegetables. She never spoke, never ate in front of him. But the food would disappear when he left the bowl and stepped outside. Sometimes he'd return to find the blankets tidied, or the water bucket freshly filled. She moved like a ghost, quiet, watchful. On the fourth day he caught her staring at the photograph on the mantel. "That's my wife," he said softly. "And my son." Well, was gonna be. Her eyes shifted to him, then back to the picture. "She died giving birth. He didn't make it neither." A flicker of something crossed her face. Sympathy? Recognition? Maybe just understanding. He didn't press her. He didn't ask anything. He just let the quiet stretch between them, like a bridge slowly being built, plank by plank. That night he heard her whisper. He had just laid down on the old cot opposite hers, the fire dimming, the wind dying outside. "Briggs," she said, barely more than breath. He sat up, heart thudding. "What?" She stared at the ceiling, her voice dry and cracked. "Thomas Briggs." "That's right." He swallowed. "What's your name?" Silence. He waited. Then, softly, she said, "Tyen." He didn't repeat it. He just nodded and laid back down, the name echoing in his mind long after sleep had claimed them both. Days became weeks. Tyen began to move more, helping him around the cabin. She never smiled, never laughed, but her eyes lost the hollow look. She fed the chickens, gathered kindling, even helped mend the fence, though her hands still trembled when she held a hammer. She didn't say much, but she listened. And sometimes, at night, she'd sit by the fire while Thomas told stories, not for her, but out loud, like the words needed to be let out or they'd rot inside him. He told her about the war, how he'd served in blue, young and foolish, thinking glory waited on the battlefield. He'd seen boys younger than Tyen, with their insides spilled across the dirt. He told her how he came west after the war, hoping to outrun his ghosts. How he met a woman named May, married her in a little church with chipped paint and a broken bell. How she laughed when it rained. How she screamed when the baby wouldn't come. He stopped there. Tyen never asked questions. She didn't need to. But she began to speak, little by little. She told him about fire, about cages, about the smell of men who drank too much and laughed too loud, about chains that rubbed her raw. about snow that tasted like freedom. She didn't say the names of the men who took her. She didn't have to. Thomas listened, jaw tight, knuckles white around the handle of his mug. One evening, just before dusk, she pointed to the tree line. "Wolves," she said. He followed her gaze. Nothing there. "You saw them again?" She nodded. "They follow." He didn't doubt her. He hadn't seen them since that day in the clearing, but he felt them. In the rustle of the trees, in the stillness between heartbeats. "Why?" he asked. She shrugged. He turned back to the fire, poking it absently. "Maybe they think you're one of them." Tyann didn't answer, but he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Later that night, a single wolf howl echoed across the valley. Tyann stood in the doorway, watching the moon rise, her figure outlined in silver. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just listened. Thomas stood behind her, arms crossed. "You ain't scared?" She shook her head. "They saved me," she said. He blinked. "They found me first, kept me warm. I think they knew I was running." Thomas studied her face in the moonlight. She looked older than her years, but also like a child who had forgotten how to be one. "Well," he said, "they must have seen something worth protecting." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Maybe," she whispered. That night, Thomas dreamed of fire. Not the kind that burned wood, but the kind that burned men. He saw Tyann chained, screaming, wolves howling in rage. He saw himself running toward her, gun in hand. Too late. He woke with sweat on his brow and the unmistakable sound of growling outside. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. Nothing, only the wind, brushing through the trees. But he knew they were there, watching. And for the first time in years, he felt something settle in his chest. Not fear, not grief, but purpose. The town of Dry Creek wasn't much to look at. A few weather-beaten buildings scattered like bones along a single dusty road, a church with a leaning steeple, and a general store that doubled as a post office and local gossip den. The saloon had been rebuilt 3 times due to brawls and gunfire, and still carried the scent of blood beneath the whiskey and sawdust. It was the closest settlement to Thomas Briggs' ranch, though he only rode in when the supplies got low or the weather forced his hand. Folks in town had stopped expecting conversation from him years ago. He preferred it that way. This time, he didn't tie up at the saloon or the store. He went straight to the livery, left Duke with a stable hand, and walked across to the feed shop with his hat pulled low. Tyann had insisted on staying behind. She wasn't ready. And maybe he wasn't ready to explain her presence to anyone just yet. As he loaded sacks of oats and dried corn onto the mule cart, he caught pieces of conversation between 2 men leaning near the water trough. "Swear on my mama's grave Johnny seen it. Said there was a girl right out of the trees, wild-looking, hair like a damn crow's nest." "What kind of girl?" "Apache probably, not a woman neither. Just a kid." Thomas paused mid-lift. The feed sack hung in his arms. "Said she didn't say nothing, just vanished back into the trees. Johnny's trapline was right near Briggs' property, too." "Think there's a connection?" The other man laughed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "Connection? Hell, Briggs don't talk to no one. Man's half a ghost hisself. Reckon he'd know if a wild girl was on his land, though. He's got them horses, don't he?" Thomas set the sack down gently and turned away before they noticed him listening. He paid for the supplies in silence and left before the gossip grew legs and ran all the way to his door. By the time he returned home, dusk was settling like smoke over the trees. The moment he stepped off the cart, he saw Tyann sitting on the porch, her eyes fixed on the woods beyond the clearing. He approached quietly. "You all right?" She nodded, but her shoulders were tense, her fingers clenched in her lap. "Someone came by," she said without turning. "Who?" "I don't know. I stayed inside, just watched." Thomas glanced around. Nothing seemed disturbed. But the way she said it wasn't nothing. Whoever it was had come close enough to spook her. He reached into the cart, pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper, and handed it to her. "Got you something. She unwrapped it slowly. A carved wooden hairbrush and a small bar of rose soap. She stared at them a long time before whispering, "Thank you." He nodded once and went inside. That night, she spoke again more than ever before. "They used to call me Little Wind," she said by the fire. He looked up from his seat. "My father gave me that name. Said I moved like the breeze, always there, and then gone. I may." He didn't interrupt, just waited. They came in, the night. White men. Loud. Drunk. They beat my uncle. Took my brother. I tried to run. They laughed. She stared into the flames, eyes dry. They put me in a wagon. Drove for days. I don't know where. I stopped counting. He felt his chest tighten. They sold us. Me and another girl. I think she died. Then they locked me in a cellar. One of them, he liked to watch me try to run. Thomas clenched his fists. I escaped during a snowstorm. Ran for days. I thought I was going to die, but the wolves found me. She looked at him then. "Do you think they knew?" "I think they knew you weren't supposed to die out there," he said. She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket on her lap. The next day, he found her outside before dawn, stacking firewood. She wore one of his old jackets, sleeves rolled up, hair brushed and tied back. She looked smaller in the jacket, but stronger in the face. Determined. They worked together without speaking. The rhythm of labor suited them both. And yet, as they split wood and repaired fence posts, something had changed. A sense of watchfulness had returned. The unease grew when Thomas rode into town a week later and found a poster nailed to the side of the store. Missing property. Reward offered. Young Apache female. Age unknown. Last seen escaping custody from Northern Trails. Dangerous. Armed. $50 reward for return. The sketch was crude, but he recognized the eyes. His stomach turned cold. Inside the store, a man was talking to the shopkeeper in low tones. He wore a long coat and carried a pistol at his hip, the kind worn too comfortably. His voice was slick, practiced. "I'm just looking to do my job." Figure she's headed south. Snow's been heavy up north. They always run where it's warm. The shopkeeper grunted. "Well, this ain't the place for that kind of trouble. But you could try the rancher lands. Briggs lives out that way." Thomas stepped in, letting the door creak loudly. The man turned, smiling. "You Briggs?" Thomas nodded once. "Name's Boone. Elias Boone. Bounty work mostly. Looking for a lost girl. Dangerous one. You seen anyone strange lately?" Thomas's face remained blank. "Just me and the wind." Boone chuckled. "Well, if you do holler, there's money in it for you. $50 goes a long way these days." Thomas paid for his supplies in silence and left. That night, he didn't sleep. He cleaned his rifle, checked the barn doors twice, and left a lantern burning low in the window. Tayen didn't ask questions. She saw it in his face when he returned. "He's here," she said. He nodded. She stared out the window for a long while. "Will they come?" Yes. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just walked to the corner where her knife was hidden and picked it up. "I won't go back." "You won't have to," he said. She didn't speak again that night. Over the next few days, Thomas reinforced the barn, laid traps along the western ridge, and sharpened every blade he owned. Tayen helped. She knew how to move quietly, how to vanish in shadow. But the wolves had begun to reappear. At first, just tracks, then eyes in the trees, then howls at night that pierced through the walls like sorrow. On the fourth night, she stood outside under the moonlight, arms folded, breath misting before her lips. "They're waiting," she said. "For what?" "For the storm." He looked at her. "It's coming," she whispered. And when it came hard. The wind howled like the wolves had summoned it. Snow fell so thick it swallowed the cabin in white. The world outside vanished. Visibility dropped to nothing, and in that whiteout silence they heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, Close. Thomas moved to the door, rifle ready, heart pounding. Tien stood beside him, knife in hand. The door creaked, and the wolves howled. The door didn't burst open all at once. It groaned, slowly, like it knew what lay behind it would alter everything. The wood trembled on its hinges, wind screaming through the cracks, whipping the lantern light sideways. Thomas had his rifle braced against his shoulder, finger on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. Then a figure stepped into the glow. Snow clung to a long duster coat. A hat, wet and sagging, tilted low over a thin face with sharp cheekbones and eyes that glittered like ice. Elias Boone. Behind him, shadows shifted, 2, maybe 3 other men. One carried a lantern, another a shotgun, both wrapped in scarves, their breath rising in foggy plumes. "Evening, Briggs," Boone said smoothly, not yet stepping inside. "Hell of a storm. Thought we'd ask to warm our bones." "You're not welcome," Thomas said flatly. Boone chuckled, brushing snow from his sleeve. "Now that ain't neighborly." He looked past Thomas into the room, eyes scanning the shadows. "You alone?" he asked, tone casual, but there was an edge to it, a gleam in his teeth that was all predator. Thomas didn't answer. He could feel Tien just behind him, silent, pressed against the edge of the hearth. She hadn't moved. Her knife was in her hand, held low. Boone's eyes drifted lower, caught the tracks near the door, small and bootless. "Funny," he said. "Town says you've been real talkative lately, real interested in certain posters." Thomas stepped forward slightly. "You come any closer, I'll shoot." Boone smiled wider. "You ain't gonna shoot me, Briggs. You're a farmer now, right? Or do you still dream in musket fire and trenches?" His hand moved toward his belt. Thomas fired. The crack of the rifle split the night. Boone spun sideways, falling into the snow with a grunt. The bullet tore through his shoulder. Not fatal, but enough to lay him down. Chaos erupted behind him. The lantern dropped, shattering against a rock. The light exploded in oil-fed fire. Shadows scrambled. One man fired a wild shot that punched through the cabin's wall. Tien ducked. Thomas slammed the door shut and dropped the beam across it. "Tien," he barked. "I'm here. Get to the back, now." She ran, crouched low. Another shot shattered the side window. Glass sprayed inward. The fire roared as the wind poured in. Thomas turned, rifle empty, and grabbed the shotgun from the wall. The wolves howled again. This time it was closer. Much closer. From the back window, Tien's voice rang out, sharp and steady. "They're here." "What?" "The wolves." And then the screaming began. It started with one man, the one who dropped the lantern. His cry cut through the storm like a knife, high-pitched and full of terror. Another shot rang out. Then nothing. Thomas yanked open the door. Boone was gone. Just blood in the snow, deep red against white. Movement to the left. He swung the shotgun up just as a second man stumbled into view, covered in blood, face pale. He didn't see Thomas. He wasn't looking. He was running. Behind him, 4 wolves emerged from the storm. Huge, silent. Their eyes glowed like embers, teeth bared but not snarling. They didn't bark. They didn't growl. They struck. The man disappeared beneath them in a flurry of snow and fur. No sound, no struggle, just silence. Thomas backed away, breath caught in his throat. The wolves stopped, turning their heads toward him. He could feel their gaze. Not hostile, not friendly either. Just aware. And then they vanished again into the storm. He turned, slammed the door, bolted it. Tien stood in the center of the room, knife still ready. "What happened?" she asked. "They took care of it." "Boone?" "Maybe. I didn't see him." She nodded slowly. "You all right?" he asked. She blinked, then slowly nodded. A crash against the side wall made them both jump. "Barn," Thomas muttered. He moved fast, throwing on his coat, grabbing another shell for the shotgun. "You stay here." "No." He turned to her. "I can help," she said. "They won't hurt me." She was right. And he knew it. Together they pushed out into the storm, side by side. The barn was dark, lit only by lightning flashes and the glow from the half-open lantern someone had dropped inside. One of the horses whinnied in panic. Thomas raised his weapon, creeping forward. A man was inside. Boone. Blood stained the front of his coat, soaking through at the shoulder. His face was pale, jaw clenched. He had his gun pointed at Duke's stall. "You point that at my horse," Thomas growled, "and I'll finish what I started." Boone turned slowly. "You shot me, Briggs. You were trespassing." Boone staggered forward, slipping slightly. "That girl's worth more than both our ranches combined. You don't know what you're holding?" "I know enough." "She's not a girl," Boone hissed. "She's a symbol. They'll send others. Worse than me. She ran from a trade that doesn't forget. You think you're protecting her? You're just making it worse." Tyann stepped into the doorway. Boone's eyes widened. "You?" Her face was calm, emotionless. "You remember me?" He nodded once. "I remember every piece I've sold. You were different. You bit me." "You cried," she said softly. Boone snarled and raised his gun. Thomas fired. This time the shot didn't miss flesh. Boone dropped like a stone, blood spraying across the straw. The horses reared in panic. Tyann stood still. Thomas lowered the shotgun. No more shouting, no more gunfire, just wind. The wolves did not come this time. They didn't need to. They had delivered Boone to the edge of the story. It was Thomas who had ended it. He turned to Tyann. "You all right?" She nodded, then looked at Boone's body. "I'm sorry," she said. Thomas didn't ask what for. Back inside the cabin, the fire had gone low again. He added wood, slowly, his hands no longer shaking. Tyann sat in her usual spot, staring into the flames. "They'll come again," she said. "I know, but they won't find me." He looked over at her. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. He nodded. Outside, the wind howled less. The storm had begun to ease. Snow still fell, but gently now, blanketing the blood, the footprints, the broken lanterns. The night had swallowed the dead and left the living wrapped in silence once more. And through that silence, one last howl rose, long and steady, not a cry of war, but of farewell. Spring came slow that year, as if the land itself hesitated, unsure if the storm was truly over. The snow melted in sluggish rivers, carving their way through the brittle earth. Trees budded cautiously. Birds returned in small flocks, singing not with joy, but with quiet recognition that life had survived another brutal season. The cabin remained standing, scorched on one side where a bullet had lit the edge of a shutter, but still sturdy. The blood in the snow had long been washed away by thaw and rain, but Thomas remembered every inch of it. He could still see Boone's body in the barn, the shock on his face, the weight of a life ended by justice too long denied. He buried the man where the wolves had cornered him, not out of pity, just necessity. Tyann never asked about the grave. She knew. She had watched him dig. She had stood with her arms folded, face impassive, as he covered the man who had once stolen her name and childhood beneath the wet soil. No prayers, no markers, just silence. But something shifted after that night. Tyann began to speak more. Not much, never more than needed. But the way she moved through the cabin was different now. She walked taller, shoulders back, head raised. The knife was still always close, but it no longer looked like a crutch. It looked like a reminder. Thomas watched her from the porch sometimes, whittling a piece of pine while she worked beside the coop or hauled buckets from the creek. She moved like someone who belonged to the earth again, like the snow had thawed something inside her too. One morning, she came in holding a bundle of wildflowers. "You ever plant anything?" she asked. Thomas blinked. "Not really. We should try." So they did. Side by side, they turned over a patch of soil near the eastern side of the house, beneath the old birch that May had once dreamed of putting a bench under. Tyann pressed seeds into the ground with care, whispered to them. Thomas didn't ask what she said. It didn't matter. That night, over stew and cornbread, she asked the question that had waited too long. What happens now? Thomas wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, set the spoon down. "We live," she nodded. "And when more come?" "We live harder." It wasn't a real answer, but it was enough. By early summer, the flowers had begun to bloom, thin stalks, fragile colors. Tyann's face softened when she saw them. She crouched beside them for hours sometimes, fingers brushing the petals, her lips moving in silent prayer or song. Then, in July, the letter came. It arrived with the supply wagon from town, tied with string, addressed in a hurried scrawl. The boy who brought it said nothing. Just handed it over and turned back down the road, eyes wide, as if he had seen ghosts clinging to the walls of the cabin. Thomas opened the letter with stiff fingers, sat down and read. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally looked up, Tyann was already standing in the doorway. "What is it?" "They want to talk," he said. "Who?" "County officials. Territorial magistrate." "About me?" "Yes." She swallowed, but didn't flinch. "When?" "3 days. Town hall. They said come ready to testify. Said I need to bring anything. I gotta prove you ain't a runaway criminal." "I'm not." "I know." She was quiet a moment, then said, "Will you come?" Thomas looked her in the eye. "Wouldn't let you go alone." So they went. The ride to town was quiet. Tyann wore a dress that had once belonged to May, loose around the arms but cinched tight with a leather belt. She'd washed it the night before, hung it carefully over the fire. Her hair was tied back in a braid, her knife still at her side. The townsfolk stared as they passed. Mothers pulled children close. Men stepped aside. But no one spoke. Not this time. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of ink and sweat. A long table waited, polished to a shine. Behind it sat 3 men in coats too clean for the dust of the frontier. The middle one, a judge with spectacles, motioned for them to sit. Thomas didn't. Tyann remained standing beside him. "You are Thomas Briggs?" the judge asked. "I am." "This girl is under your protection?" "She is." "What is her name?" "Tyann." The judge scribbled something. "And what claim do you have to her?" Thomas hesitated. "I don't have a claim. She's not property. She's family." The judge raised an eyebrow. "No formal adoption papers, no religious sponsorship, no tribal representation." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "What does she need to be safe?" Another man, younger, leaned forward. "You need someone to verify she was taken against her will. Someone with standing." A voice came from the back of the room. "I can do that." All eyes turned. An old man in worn buckskin stepped forward, silver braids hanging over his shoulders. He held a staff in one hand, a piece metal strung around his neck. "I am Joseph Talltree, interpreter, council speaker, and witness. I know this girl. I know her family." Tyann gasped. "Uncle Joe?" He smiled gently. "I found out too late. But I found you." The judge cleared his throat. "You can verify her tribal affiliation?" "I can verify she was taken, sold, escaped. This man," he nodded to Thomas, "is not her captor. He is her rescuer." The room went still. The judge looked over his papers. "Then we will process protection status under emergency tribal recognition. She will remain under Mr. Briggs' care until formal adoption is filed. Given testimony, there is no cause for detainment or further inquiry." Thomas let out a breath. Tyann closed her eyes. The judge nodded. "This session is closed." They left the courthouse to a stunned silence. That night, under a blanket of stars, Tien stood beside the fire and asked, "What now?" Thomas shrugged. "Whatever you want." She stared at the sky. "I want to build a school. For girls like me." He blinked. "I want them to read, to know their names matter." He looked at her, truly looked. The girl who once flinched at shadows now stood like stone, unshaken by the world's gaze. "I reckon we can do that," he said. They didn't talk more. They didn't need to. The wolves came one last time in early autumn. Thomas saw them first, standing on the ridge at dawn, 5 of them, still as statues. Tien joined him on the porch, watching as the lead wolf stepped forward, then turned away. "They're going," she said softly. "They done what they came to do." She nodded. The wolves disappeared into the forest, never looking back. Years passed. The schoolhouse stood where the old barn used to be, with a bell that rang each morning. Tien taught the children of settlers and tribes alike, her voice calm, her hands firm. They learned to write their names, to speak truths the world had tried to bury. Thomas sat in the back row sometimes, listening. He never remarried, never needed to. He had a family, not born, but built, with quiet, with pain, and with love. In a land where silence often meant survival, a lonely rancher and a stolen girl forged a bond deeper than blood, one built from trust, healing, and the untamed spirit of the wild. The wolves that once guarded her disappeared into the forest, but their legacy remained, in every footstep she took toward hope, in every lesson she taught beneath that western sky. Not all families are born. Some are found, through pain, through fire, and through the courage to protect what the world tried to discard. If stories of redemption, resilience, and unlikely love in the rugged frontier speak to your soul, then subscribe now to Wild West Love Chronicles. Don't miss the next heart-stirring journey from the wild edges of the American West, where every tale holds a hidden truth and every ending whispers of new beginnings. Hit that bell, partner. The next story's already riding in.